All right, so I hope you checked your answer with a friend. Anybody have any questions on it? Any arguments where you think you were right and they were wrong? No? All right, so same EQ. You're welcome in your journal to put same EQ, but when I ask you next week what was the EQ on 915, be sure that you write it out. Tutorials today after school. If you're going to retest, you need to come in today first and go over the test, see what you missed, figure out what you did wrong so you'll be prepared for your retest. And then we'll finish up our Sig Fig notes today. Tomorrow we're going to do a little paired activity, but you won't quiz on it until Friday. All right? I think that is everything on that. All right, let us move on. Let us move on today to the exciting world of Sig Figs. Where am I at on my notes?
I didn't know that when I first got it. When it said big, so I thought you said big.
All right, we are right here in our notes. And so now that we've learned what sig figs we're gonna kind of start applying them. So that kind of starts here. So when you're giving your answer, when you do some kind of calculation, this is in your notes. It's page 10, thank you. Page 10. So, the problem is now that you know what sig figs are, they apply to every calculation that you do. So your calculator is going to spit out one number, but then you have to look at that number and you have to make the decision of how many sig figs do you really need to record from that number. Okay? So that's going to involve rounding. Rounding is just like it has been before. If you have a number you're rounding and it's a 5 or above, behind it you would round up. If it's a 4 below, then you would leave it as it is. So if we look at these different numbers, we're going to round to a certain number of sig figs. So if we look at number 1, I've done some kind of calculation. My calculator spit this out, but because of sig fig rules, I can only have 4 significant figures. So I look at my number, 1, 2, 3, 4. The 6 is my 4th significant figure. So then I look at the number right behind it. Since it's an 8, I'm going to raise my 6 up to a 7, and I would record it as 689.7 grams. You're just looking at the significant figure that you're interested in and only one place behind it. Don't go further than that. So my next one, I want it to have 2 significant figures. Remember, these are placeholders. So the 2 is my second significant figure. Since there's a 1 behind it, I do not need to round my 2 up, so it would be 0.0072. And that would be rounding that to 2 significant figures. To me, the fewer significant figures you have, the harder it sometimes can be because you got to put in some placeholders. So like here, I want to round this number to where there's only 1 significant figure. So that is where my 4 is. Since there's a 0 behind it, I'm not going to round it up. So my 4 is going to stay as a 4. But I can't go from a magnitude of 4,000 to just 4. So I have to put placeholders to replace those other numbers. And that's kind of where some of them get a little tricky. If I just went from 4,009 to 4, that doesn't make sense. So 4 is my sig fig, and these are considered placeholders to get me in the same magnitude. Whenever you look at scientific notation, the number of this exponent part does not affect that. We look at our number here. That's what determines our sig figs. Once again, I can only have 1 sig fig, so that's where my 3 is. because there's a 9 behind it. I'm going to raise that 3 up to a 4. But once again, I can't go from 39 to 4. So what else do I need to add? A placeholder. All right, why don't y'all try those last 3 and round it off to how many sig figs it says. All right, anybody get something for number 5? 2 significant figures. 8,800, exactly. 7 is my second significant figure because there's a 9 behind it. I would raise it up to 8, but once again, I've got to put placeholders. I can't go from 8,792 to just 88. Number 6, 0.00, perfect. And number 7, 0.105, all right, perfect. To me, the fewer significant figures it has, the harder it is. That's kind of how I feel about it, especially if you're having to kind of just put in a placeholder. All right, so let's move on to. So we're going to move on to actually putting them into some calculations. And once again, your calculation that you do cannot give you an answer that has more significant figures or seems to be more precise in the measurements that you started off with. And what makes it a little bit difficult is that there's one set of rules for adding and subtracting, and then there's another set of rules for multiplying and dividing. So I did not make those rules. I just got to teach them. In the long run, we do much more multiplying and dividing. So for adding or subtracting, when you're adding or subtracting, you're going to round the sum or the difference so that it has the same number of decimal places as the number that has the fewest decimal places. So in other words, if I'm adding these two numbers, this has 4 decimal places. This one only has 2. So when I get my answer, it can only be 2 places behind the decimal. Okay? So when you put this into your calculator, you're going to get something like 386.5789, something like that. But we said it can only be 2 places behind the decimal. So that's where my 7 is. So it would become 386.58. So look at what you're adding, look at whatever you're subtracting, whatever has the fewest places behind the decimal, that's going to determine how many places behind the decimal your answer should have. All right, so why don't y'all give those a try? See what you get for your answers. All right, so if we look at these, underline the number that had the fewest places behind the decimal. So that's what's going to determine my answer. So what do we get for the first one? 22.3. Perfect. B. Oh, I messed up on that next one, didn't I? Let's try that again. I think 0 places would be fewer than 1 place. So what do we get here? It had to be 56 because that 45, which is almost what I did too, that 45 had no places behind the decimal, so my answer can have no places behind the decimal. And then my last one, 300.0. Because this one had 2 places behind the decimal, so my answer would have 2 places behind the decimal. Well, let's see, what did you get from? When I put it in my maybe you just punch something in, because that actually is what you get in your calculator. Maybe you just punched in the wrong number. All right, now if we are multiplying or dividing, we have a different set of rules. And overall, like I said, this is what we do more of throughout the year. If you're multiplying or dividing, then your answer should have the same number as significant figures as whichever number you started with that had the fewest significant figures. So in other words, this had 3 significant figures. This one only had 2. So when I get my answer, it can only have 2 significant figures. Fewest. So you don't look at places behind your decimal. You go to counting significant figures. Okay. So like I said, 2 sets of rules can be a little bit confusing. So if I put this in my calculator, I get something like that. But because I can only have 2 sig figs, I look here, 7 is my second sig fig. Since there's a 4 behind it, I don't need to round it up, so my answer would be 1.7. Yeah. So what's the difference going to be from what you're used to doing with calculations? If you're going to get some number in your calculator, and usually it's not going to be how you need to record your answer. You're going to have to make adjustments to it. All right. So why don't y'all try those few on the next page? All right. All right. So if I put this in my calculator, I get something like 0.97814. But because of this number, I can only have 2 sig figs, so that's where my 7 is. Since there's an 8 behind it, this would become 0.98. So if you wrote this down, that would be a wrong answer. This would be a correct answer. All right, what do we get for B? 20. All right, that's kind of what was a little tricky one, because you got 19.995, but I could only have 1 sig fig. So that was where my 1 is. I rounded up to a 2, and then I'd have to put my placeholder. C? 933.3 is what you get in your calculator, but you can only have 1 sig fig. So what am I going to have? 900, right? Like I said, B and C to me were the trickier because it's hard when you just have 1 sig fig. You got a lot of placeholders, and that's not a negative sum. This is what your calculator gives you, but that's kind of irrelevant to us now that we know what sig figs are. And what did we get for a D? 170, what? 176. You got this in your calculator, but because of this one, we could only have 3 sig figs, which was right here. Since it was a 7 behind it, then that was raised up to 6. So this number is not the number you would need to record. All right. So 2 sets of rules. Adding or subtracting, we're looking at places behind the decimal. Multiplying or dividing, we're going to counting sig figs. Good. All right, so when we talk about scientific notation, the coefficient, which is the number in front of the base, that's what determines your sig figs. This base and that exponent, those aren't going to affect your sig figs. You're not really going to have your phone out right here in front of me, are you, Glenn? No, I know you're not. Y'all think that I'm blind. I just told y'all I raised 3 children. So the coefficient shows your scientific notation and determines your number of sig figs. So in other words, right there, that has 4 sig figs. This is not going to affect it. If the number is changed from standard form, which is how we're used to writing it, to scientific notation, your scientific notation has to have your same number of sig figs. So in other words, this original number has 5 sig figs, so when I put it into scientific notation, it also has to have 5 sig figs. So it would become 3.2509 times 10 to the 1, 2, 3, 10 to the third. Y'all know how to write scientific, y'all been taught how to write scientific notation. Moving your decimal is either positive or negative exponent. Huh? Oh, yes, please. Thank you. Yes, sir, it is negative. I did put it on the door? Yes, it is negative because this number is less than 1. Y'all don't remember scientific notation? Oh, mercy, mercy. I think we're going to go over it again in some other set of notes, but y'all did learn it. Y'all just vaguely remember it. All right, last little bit, exact numbers, and I talked about this before too. Exact numbers are numbers that do not affect your sig figs. So they're like counting numbers or maybe like a measurement. We know there's 12 inches in a foot. Even though we don't write it, that's 12.0000, an infinite number of zeros. So whenever we use a counting number or a number like that, or a conversion factor or a constant, those do not affect your sig figs. And as we go throughout the year and we start to use those again, I'll bring this up and it'll make a little bit more sense. But those numbers are considered to have an infinite number of sig figs, so they're not going to affect your calculations. All right, so what you're going to do now is, if you will look in your Chromebooks. And if you will look under practice. I would, yeah. Where it says significant figures, practice 1. Y'all are going to work on that. See, I'm probably going to have to give you a number to get in, because even though you've been in this class for a while, it's still not recognizing it. So try, but let me know if it'll let you get in. This has 50 questions on it. Somebody asked me how many questions you're supposed to do. I said 50. Not 50 today. This is practice. We're not quizzing until Friday. So this is practice that you should work on. It has just figuring out how many sig figs. It has rounding. It has the calculations. It has everything. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a number. You know, you can do it more than once. So you can come back and practice it again. All right. So you'll just have to go like to quiz, and I'm going to give you a pen. The same thing. You'll just have to go to quiz, and I'm going to give you a pen. 2, 5, 6. Well, let me know when y'all are ready, because y'all might want to jot it down so you can. In my mind, you're going to want to practice tonight too. Enter a join code. 256 33 120. No, you don't need it. They've switched classes. It should only be these 2 that need it. Most of y'all should be able to join fine. It's still messed up if y'all switch classes. Huh? No. Did that let you get in or you still wasn't? See, did that code let you get it in? Were you able to get in? Okay. Everybody else was good?